Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U. My name is Dove, and my friend Keith is here to bring me up to speed on everything I don't know about soccer and Arsenal. This week featured the season opening Community Shield match against Manchester City. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Dove. Are you enjoying your first ever piece of silverware?
First ever piece of silverware with the England crest on it.
The FA, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
The Community Shield used to be called the Charity Shield, and then apparently they discovered that the money that was supposed to be going to charities wasn't going to charities quite as much as they promised. So it is now the Community Shield. But that was 20 years ago. So, does it count? Well, we won it, so yes, it counts. But it was quite an afternoon, or quite a morning, I guess.
Yeah, no, it was enjoyable. I mean, they really had me going there for a while. Before we get to the match in detail, we got some other stuff to talk about. So, by way of follow up, I just wanted to set the record straight when talking. Hopefully, this is the last time that we talk about the Tottenham jersey and Spider-Verse, but I don't actually know what AIA is. This is kind of apropos of our entire discussion about sponsors as they pertain to MLB, which incidentally I did catch the last inning and a half of the Yankees match on Friday. And yeah, it does look awful. But anyways, it's funny because this is an English league. Like presumably aside from Star Insurance, like we're going to know who most of the sponsors probably are in American sports. But yeah, I don't know who AIA is, but I recognize them as the shirt front for Tottenham for whatever that's worth to them, apparently.
I did look this up. They're an insurance company, or a multinational insurance and finance corporation based in Hong Kong. So,
aha. Now we know.
make of that what you will. I mean, there's quite a lot of interesting. There is kind of interesting the number of different companies and the global reach of the league. It'll be interesting. I think it's after this season. They've changed the rules such that you can no longer they can no longer have gambling companies,
right?
Betting companies, a lot of which are based in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and are shirt sponsors. And for a lot of different reasons, they're beginning to crack down on it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So next thing I want to just kind of put out there. So I had been under the impression last episode that Inter Miami might have been founded in 2022. The reason I thought that was because when I was going through the menus, just looking around in the soccer section in the Apple TV app, I had landed on Inter Miami's Pro Next team, which, as discussed, is like their one division down, I guess, from MLS. And that team was founded in 2022. It has MMXXII on the bottom of their crest. So that was where I saw that. I didn't pull it completely out of nowhere. So we have a little bit of ancient follow-up that we're hoping to get to at the end of the episode. We'll tease that a little bit. Meanwhile, we do have some news from this week. So where's Jesus? What's going on with him?
Yeah, so apparently there is I don't know what I guess we'd call it, a flare-up, so to speak, of his knee injury. Something's left over, so he had to have a procedure. And as a result, he will miss what Arteta says a few weeks, which is we don't really know what that means. But this is still sort of appears to be left over from the surgery and the injury he had during the World Cup. So he's gone in for a procedure. Hopefully this resolves this going forward, and it's cleans it up going forward, because he's obviously a big loss for all the reasons we've talked about. But yeah, for now, no Jesus, which is interesting. I looked up the last time we beat Manchester City. Gabriel Jesus was in the starting lineup for City.
Right, makes sense.
which was in the summer of 2020, the semifinals of the FA Cup. We beat them in Wembley, in an empty Wembley,
right,
because of COVID. So there's some looking back in the past, but we can get to that later on in the show.
Yeah, so and I hear that there's some confirmations, and I guess the opposite of confirmations, whatever that word would be, for some transfers. What do we have there?
Right. So quickly, the one we know for sure, Austin Trusty, who is a defender that they picked up from Colorado, signed last year, and I want to say he was signed in January from Colorado, which is the club that the Kroenke Enterprises Group owns in the U.S. He has been signed by Sheffield United, so he will
Hmm.
be in the Premier League, and we'll see him in at some point this season. So, and good luck to him there. It was interesting. He was always seemed like a player who wasn't really long for Arsenal. Was kind of there to get to Europe, get some time under his belt. Spent last season with Birmingham City, and apparently did very well there. So it's good for him to wind up at a club like Sheffield, who's now making their way into the next level up.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I'd seen him during the skills competition during the MLS All Star game. Did he actually? I don't remember. Did he play during the All Star game? I can't remember the lineup, but
he might have come on late in the end.
yeah,
I don't remember all of the players. He was on there. I suspect certainly he was in the skills competition in part because he's an American and
right
he
from
had played
Philadelphia. They
in
said, yeah,
MLS. So he was definitely someone who could, there's a little bit of a connection there as far as working with the MLS. I think he might have gotten on the field. Also, because the other prominent American at Arsenal, Matt Turner, was not on the preseason tour because he was,
right,
relaxing after a summer with the national team.
right. Although it was funny, I I forget which match it was. One of their U.S. matches, I saw Matt Turner like after the match congratulating them. He was able to attend
Mm.
to watch, but he wasn't on the roster. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously for the first part of it, he was on vacation. Clearly, met up with them at some point, and
mm,
then was still sort of working his way back into training. Although now he is,
and
you saw he was up there standing next to Odegaard when we received the shield. So
I actually turned off the match after they won. I probably should have stuck around to see them receive the trophy. There's no precedent for me for this. I'm not used
yeah,
used to
yeah.
them
I
actually
mean,
winning anything yet.
right, but yeah, I mean, anytime your team wins anything, you kind of want to let it linger and hang on. It's awesome.
Yeah,
And especially as you get to the part where they go up, they receive their medals, and then they hoist the trophy, and it's always a good time.
yeah,
And it's when you lose that you just want to just flip the TV off and just leave.
right.
Just don't want
Yeah, I had
anything to
other
do with
stuff
that.
going on. I basked privately.
Yeah.
But speaking of Matt Turner,
Yeah, but say Matt Turner, Arsenal goalkeeper, probably not for much longer. The rumor is that he is on his way to Nottingham Forest, which is kind of fascinating because Arsenal is going to play Forest this weekend. I don't know if that means he would play for them. Depends on, I guess, when the transfer officially goes through and when he shows up, actually shows up in Nottingham. But he looks like he is on his way. The agreement has been made, and he had a medical today, and he's going to go. Looks like he's going to go there, which is good for him. It's hard to see him getting any real time this season behind Ramsdale. But he's definitely, the sense is he's improved his game, and it was a good opportunity for him to get from MLS to Europe, working with a big club, working with an Arsenal, and parlaying that into an opportunity at a Forest, which means that like Trusty, he'll be in the Premier League this year, and good luck to him, except for this Saturday. But
right. So yeah, still another couple transfers that there's news on, right?
right, and this was also tied in. The same story that I had for Turner's came from David Ornstein, who's probably the most reliable of the Arsenal, transfer rumor people on the internet. He is also reports in the same article that the Arsenal's interest in David Raya is not only real, but it seems like that is being finalized.
Mm.
And so Arsenal have made an offer. Brentford turned it down, but discussions have continued. Raya clearly wants to go. By all accounts, personnel terms have been agreed on. So basically, Arsenal and Raya have decided what his contract would be. It's just a question of how much money are they going to give Brentford to get him, and what's the schedule
Hmm.
for paying that, and sort of all the details and intricacies. And then one last little bit on transfers. Well, two of them actually. Speaking of transfers, and offers. This is the more on the outgoing pile. Fuller and Balogun was the subject of an offer from Monaco, which is in the French league, although technically Monaco is, of course, an independent country. But they have one club, Monaco, who plays in Ligue 1. They have put in a bid for him, but Arsenal rejected it. I didn't see any numbers on it, but presumably felt it was too low. We know there were some rumors about interest from Inter Milan or Internazionale in Italy. So we'll see. I suspect, given the interest that's out there, Balogun probably will end up leaving, but we will certainly find out. And then a Brazilian winger, Marquinhos, who mostly made appearances in the Europa League last year and scored a pretty impressive goal at some point in the group stages. He will be loaned to Nantes, also in the French league. So, I mean, Arsenal is a very big club in terms of we talk about them being a big club in terms of their reputation, but also quite literally in terms of the size of the squad, and a number of players are going to have to go out to get down to something more manageable. Otherwise, in a case like Marquinhos, he's just not going to play. There's just no space for him. So we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks. I didn't see exactly when the window closes. A couple of years, it used to be it closed around, I say, like the end of August, and then a couple of years ago, the Premier League changed it where they would actually close, at least in terms of arrivals, bringing players in, would close on with the start of the season. And then COVID hit, and they just blew that out altogether. So I don't know technically when the transfer window actually closes, but
I think they had said the commentators on the Community Shield match, I believe, had said September 1st is what I recall them saying.
Which is typically more in line with the European continent writ large. It's kind of the one or two times they ended up doing it that way. There was always this weird sort of space where English clubs were done buying players, and certainly buying and selling with each other, but they could sell players out still. So you see a couple of guys, once you realize, okay, you're not going to be on the squad, you don't fit on our depth chart, we'll sell or loan you out to a club on the continent, and then some of that was still taking place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of the French league, while I was out this weekend, I actually saw a PSG uniform being worn, or jersey being worn by a kid. I didn't see it from behind. I have to imagine it was probably Kylian Mbappe, but
I suspect it was Messi
for PSG.
Oh, he was on PSG. Yeah, he finished last. Yeah, that's where he's played for the last couple of years.
I forgot that. Yeah. Apparently.
Although, you know what? So have a lot of people, because they were not too disappointed to see him leave.
Well, yeah, I guess in the U.S., when I've seen Messi jerseys to date, they've pretty much all been Argentina jerseys.
A lot of Argentina.
So, yeah.
Probably still lingering, a few still, Barcelona still lingering out there. I mean, it wouldn't, who knows? It could very well be Mbappe. Yeah. Although, who knows how much longer he'll be at PSG.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so now we're going into other clubs' business. There's a year left on his contract. And pretty much everybody knows, it's a giant open secret, not even really a secret, just kind of open. He wants to go to Real Madrid. PSG would like to sell him to Real Madrid and recoup the massive amount of money Real would have to pay them to get a player of his caliber. And by a player of his caliber, we mean arguably the best player in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Real Madrid, of course, doesn't want to pay that. So Mbappe, because he has 1 year left on his contract, if he plays out the year with PSG at the end of the season, he's a free agent, or what we would call a free agent, and Real doesn't have to pay PSG anything.
Yeah.
So PSG would like to sell him now. Real would like to get him, perhaps not now. Mbappe would like to play for Real as soon as possible. And there was apparently an offer floating around there from the Saudi League of somewhere on the order of like $500 million or some just ridiculous money that was going just for Mbappe.
Right. Wow.
But he, does he want to go to Saudi Arabia for a year? I don't know. That's a soap opera mess, and God, I'm so glad that it's not us at all.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so glad we're not touching any of that. Although it would be pretty fascinating if we showed up and we just told PSG, here, we'll take Mbappe for a year, because then we might win the league. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
It's actually funny, since Messi came up in conversation. it's interesting to me. So my son continues his interest in Messi as a player.
Hmm.
He's been watching the just about exactly 7 minute recaps that Apple TV produces for the MLS matches. He's
Hmm.
been watching those of every single Inter Miami match the last couple weeks. These are all Leagues Cup games. I think one of them we accidentally watched twice. Like I'd watched it with him, and then I was like, "Did we watch that?" And he said no. And as we were watching, I was like, "Yeah, I remember the comments I'm thinking to make to you. I remember making them to you before he didn't remember." So we watched it again. It's always a pleasure seeing more Messi. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
boy,
it's
he's really good. Holy cow! I
oh
mean,
my
like I
god,
knew this isn't a surprise, but
yeah,
I mean,
it is nuts. But so there was a funny comment made tonight. We were watching the recap of last night's match. Um, he's telling me I really like Messi. I like him a lot more than I like Arsenal, and he's apparently somehow taught himself bleep talking to censor myself. And he's like, "Yeah, he's better than Arsenal. They're a piece of garbage." Uh, so that was unexpected and uncalled for.
ouch! That cuts deep, man.
Yeah. But he did watch some of the Community Shield with me. And I think I think it is in fun. But I don't know where that came from. That's kind of funny because I have not myself, like I haven't really like trash talked any other teams to him, and I don't know if his friends are into sports to the point where they would have done that. So maybe YouTube. I don't know.
There's two possibilities. Obviously, as kids, that it does. It's easy to run to the extremes of conversation, right?
Yeah.
Everything that isn't the best is the worst. But also it could come from the kids. But also, you're right. If he's trolling around YouTube, yeah, that's a pretty good way to find all sorts of
Uh-huh.
opinions about things. But I'll stop there. That's my self censorship.
So meanwhile, in other news, longtime listeners may recall at some point last season, the conversation ventured over into cricket. I had watched some cricket, so that seems to happen somehow when I end up on ESPN Plus late at night. I get exposed to things that I might not have otherwise. This happened on Saturday night with the Community Shield match being on Sunday morning. I wanted to make sure because with my schedule in the morning, I might, and it turned out I did. I knew I might be landing at the TV like right at kickoff time. So I wanted to pre-flight and make sure that I was logged into ESPN Plus, that everything was good. So I did that, and then I lingered for a little bit. So a couple things. So the more pertinent thing that came up first was I'd seen Leicester and Leeds were both having games, I think like this past weekend, that refer to the English League Championship. And I'm just wondering what that is.
So what it is a shortened. So officially it's the English Football League, and they're in the championship. And it took me a moment because I
Oh,
forgot. That's right. Leicester and Leeds had been relegated. So
okay.
yeah, because
I forgot that too.
yeah,
Okay.
Leicester and Leeds they're in the championship, the second division, and their season actually started this weekend. The Premier League kicks off next weekend, but they started this past weekend.
Right. So
So
English
yeah,
League Championship is the name of the league. It's not a championship that they play in. It is
no, it's
the
no,
championship
it
league.
technically it's the English Football League. I think actually it might also be with they're saying English, as in from England, League Championship. I don't know. I'm guessing. I think there's technically the word football should be the EFL Championship because the EFL is the the umbrella organization that runs
Right.
the next actually I think all the divisions down after the Premier League, but certainly typically the league is the top three. They're the second, third, and fourth divisions, which are called
Right.
Championship, League One, and League Two, because that's not confusing at all.
Right. So that is referring though to a league, not a tournament.
Right, yeah. Well,
Right.
only in the sense that a league is a tournament. It's just done in a very specific format. But yes, it is referring to the championship, where both Leeds and Leicester are looking to get back to the Premier League. So we'll see how that goes for them.
Yeah, so then I ventured over to what was playing on the Ocho, which before this past weekend, I didn't know that ESPN 8 was a real thing. I had only seen it referred to in Saturday Night Live sketches before. I didn't know if there actually was an Ocho.
It is the joke stems from the movie Dodgeball. I
Right.
don't know if you saw that one. The joke that their championship being held on ESPN 8, the Ocho. And then a few years ago, a decade at this point, ESPN said, "No, let's do this." It started as like a 1 day thing where they called them this was regular broadcast ESPN. It was in like this time of the year in the summer where there's baseball, but there's not a whole lot going on. So, like for a day, they were the Ocho, where they showed dodgeball, cornhole, all these other sports that they would never show, but like weird, obscure things they plugged in and had some fun with it. Though, if you go far enough back, I mean, I remember watching ESPN2 in the mid '90s and watching like lumberjack championships,
Right.
which forget what it was called, but it's the one where they run on the log in the water, and it's two guys.
Yeah.
Like it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's something else
Okay, so
to see.
as
Yeah.
ever, I am glad that I asked you about this. So I was basically right. It was a joke, but now, many years later, it has become an occasional real thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that and but now I don't know that they do it with the network anymore. I think now they do use ESPN Plus, the streaming platform, for it, because you can do whatever you want on there. Yeah,
Right.
that's how you watch cricket.
Well, yeah. So I'd clicked on at the time what it said was going to be dog surfing. And I was curious if it was people on dogs or dogs on surfboards. I was curious to see what I would find, but apparently that was over, and I was instead seeing wiffle ball championships. Like, apparently
Oh,
there are actually rules to play wiffle ball as a game. It is
oh yeah,
actually a thing, and grown adults play it,
oh yeah.
pitching like 90 plus miles per hour to each other, which is
I mean, if
nuts.
you know how to whip that ball, it's definitely the way it dances and darts. Although I didn't realize they did dog surfing. Now I want to watch.
Well, stay tuned into the Ocho for more.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Community Shield. But before we do that, let's have a word from our sponsor for this episode, which is Liquid IV. Liquid IV, of course, is the category-winning hydration brand fueling your well-being, and their hydration multiplier is the one product you're missing in your daily routine. In just one stick, which, as we've described before, is like a packet that is stick-shaped, you get 5 essential vitamins and 2 times faster hydration than water alone. Use it first thing in the morning, before a workout, when you feel run down, after a long night out, and on long flights. How have you been staying fit this summer, if at all, Keith?
Well, as we mentioned, I was moving, which was a physically
There you go.
demanding enterprise, but also the usual sort of gym stuff. Really, anything I can do to stay indoors, because I'm in Houston, Texas, where the highs have been over 100 for 2 weeks now. It's and
Right.
the end is in sight, where we might dip to like 97. So
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, that sounds good. So it definitely sounds like you need some hydration. So when you do, of course, keep Liquid IV in mind. They taste great. They come in a bunch of great flavors. I'm particular to the strawberry lemonade. I've seen, if you want to buy in bulk, I've seen Sam's Club carries the lemon lime. If you want to get a whole bunch of it, which we can encourage. However, before you do that, make sure that you use our offer code, which is Gooner, Gooner, to save 20% at checkout when you go to liquidiv.com. So yeah, you put 1 stick of Liquid IV in 16 ounces of water, and it hydrates you 2 times faster. Again, if you use code Gooner, you will get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com. That is 20% off anything in your order. So shop better hydration today using our promo code. There is a link in the show notes. So yeah, the Community Shield. I think the most important thing that I've noticed, seeing them in their home kit now against Barcelona and then against Manchester City, is I think lightning bolts on the outside is definitely the proper orientation for their socks. I think they have standardized on this. This was an open dangling question after the last match of the prior season, so it's good to see it. They settled on a standard.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously it's the first game of the season, so they'll soon lose all semblance of uniformity on the socks soon enough. But I do want to point out, I think this is an important place to start, that Harry Kane has played 435 games for Tottenham, and has 0 trophies. Declan Rice has played 1 game for Arsenal and has a trophy.
Yeah, gives you perspective.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
That's great. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's different ways that we could talk about this match. As far as blow by blows, because it went scoreless for so long, and there weren't even really that many attempts on target. I think a lot of my notes are really filled with fouls and an abundance of yellow cards, primarily against Arsenal. I think the officiation was at least a big part of the story of this match. How did you feel about the officiation?
It definitely was. So certainly in the moment, I had some problems with it. A few of them were addressed slightly by some things that were apparently said by the commentary, but I didn't hear. But then were addressed, in some stuff I was listening to or heard about post game. One of the things that happens in the early part of a season is you'll hear this term points of emphasis. Basically, every offseason leagues, and this is true not just in the Premier League, but pretty much any sports league. Leagues and the referees will review the rules, talk about things they're like, okay, well, this has gotten lax, or we really want to emphasize this rule. And so you'll see some things at the start of the new year, any new season, they'll start penalizing things. They're like, I never penalized that before. What's going on? And what they're doing is they're actually calling the rule book. They're just deciding that, hey, we've let this go. Now we're going to do more of it, or there's been a change and they're adjusting to it. So there's a big emphasis this year, apparently, is dealing with time wasting. So you saw were cards given out for players who engaged in time wasting. The most common form of time wasting in a lot of cases is basically kicking away a dead ball,
Right?
Which in fact is how City got their first yellow. Alvarez, and which he did it, and I was half joking when he said it when he did it. So that's a yellow because the ball went out for a throw and he just kicked it away.
Wish granted.
And then sure enough, the referee came over and yellow. Which, fine. I mean, we saw a little bit of that too in stoppage time, right? We talked about this during the World Cup, how they were calculating it differently. You're seeing that now being integrated. And so you got tremendous amount of stoppage time, both in the first and second halves, which is arguably, hopefully, more accurate in terms of time that was actually lost during the course of the game. So time wasting is a big one. In fact, so Thomas Partey picked up a yellow, which at the time I was bothered by because I thought Arsenal committed harder fouls in the last 5 minutes. City was committing harder fouls than that, no calls or no cards. Turns out he does actually tap the ball away afterwards, and that's what he was carded for, which makes a little more sense, even if I'm still bothered by some other aspects of it. Arteta picks up a yellow in the first half. The conversation was about how he runs out of the box. It's not that. It's he runs out of the box and is doing this, making the card gesture. And apparently that's something they're going to crack down on, is people, mostly players, but also clearly managers, calling for cards like that because they want to try and stop some of that conversation, which is one of those things that sounds wonderful and will last for about a month before, everyone complains. Other teams start doing it and they just stop bothering. That's the other side of the points of emphasis. It's pretty curious how many of them, two things happen. Either everyone realizes, yeah, that's probably a good idea and they adjust, or it was never really a good idea. And then after about a month or two, everyone just forgets that happened and we go back to the way we did things before. So,
right. Yeah. Yeah, probably.
But overall, even knowing that, it does help explain some of the cards I did see. I'm still very bothered by many of the cards that were not given.
Right.
And this is not I don't want to turn this into going after the referees, but and this isn't a pro Arsenal perspective. I thought there were plenty of cards as well that Arsenal probably could have or should have gotten that weren't given. You saw that a lot, and both teams did this, the pullback. So a guy runs past him, and they reach out and grab the shoulder and pull him back.
Yeah, that was what I thought the Partey foul or yellow card was for, but apparently it was time wasting, you were saying.
Right, and so what's interesting about that is, especially you see that, Partey kind of brushes his shoulder and tips him back. I think another Arsenal player did. He had done a much worse version of the exact same thing. No call at all.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of A
Right, and
yellow
that's what I
for
thought
that?
Arteta was arguing was, hey, you gave
Yeah.
Party a yellow card for this. You
Yeah.
didn't give the City player a card for the same thing like less than 10 minutes later. What gives?
Yeah.
And that's
And
why,
there
yeah,
were
so yeah, it all
and
makes
there were
sense
and
now.
there were a lot of those. And City is sort of famous for that. They call it the tactical foul. So one of the things they do to sort of control possession, if they lose the ball, they're always sort of vulnerable to a counterattack. So what they're basically do, I mean, and we know they do this, is they're basically told just foul the guy as quickly as you can. It breaks up the attack, it slows things down, allows everyone to get back defensively.
Hmm.
And it's the kind of thing that like you get why they do it, but it's really annoying. And given the circumstances, in some cases, it probably should be given a card. And there
Hmm.
was one, and Rodri in particular was extremely bothersome. Bernardo Silva was all over the place again, committing these fouls that some of them weren't even called. Rodri had one. I forget who it was. It might have been Odegaard. Basically, rugby tackles him, like pulls
Yeah.
him back and drags him to the ground, and there's no call at all. And you're just like, what are we even doing here?
Hmm.
Um, so it's very frustrating to watch. I heard a lot of I heard some Arsenal fans talking about bias and favor to Manchester City. Apparently, some people said the commentators made that comment. I didn't see that. I just thought it was kind of a general sense. I just didn't think it was a very well officiated game in that sense. Um, that was sort of my impression there. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting how you sort of mentioned there isn't a lot going on in the first. There aren't a lot of shots. It's not a lot of end to end action. And I admit at the time I was kind of nervous watching it. I don't know if you felt the same way, especially early on with City controlling possession the way they did.
Well, in the first half, I wasn't really that nervous. Did City control possession? Because it felt to me like Arsenal was pretty dominant. Like all the attempts in the first half were Arsenal. It seemed like the ball was on City's side a lot of the time.
I mean,
So I wasn't really feeling it.
I would have said the first maybe 15, 20 minutes, definitely City was on the front foot. Now, but as you point out, it wasn't empty possession, but what did it lead to in terms of how many good opportunities did they have in the early going?
Yeah.
Really not any. Um, and really, the goal they had in the second half came off of a breakdown, a long ball, and almost a counterattack. So not at all the kind of patient build up, the probing, and a couple of
Hmm.
mistakes from Arsenal. And Party missed his man in the midfield, and they go the other way. It's a nice shot from the young player they had there was his
Yeah.
name.
Cole Palmer.
Yeah, Cole Palmer. Young guy, good for him. Was a nice goal, nicely taken goal. Um, Frustrating to give up, of course,
Yeah.
but yeah, overall, yeah, City didn't have a lot of chances. And the more you watch that, and especially is you really sort of see how, in a lot of ways, that's what Arsenal wanted. I mean, I think the other big benefit here was having Saliba. I mean, you saw there Erling Haaland was there, right? And I mean, think
Yeah.
about the 3 times we saw him last year. I mean, what a terror he was. What did he do on Sunday?
Yeah. No, really nothing at all.
He got handled by Saliba, which I
Yeah.
mean, boy, we missed him in some of those games. Yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean,
so
I remember one play in particular. I don't remember which Arsenal players they were, but we had two guys on him. Like he had a chance in the box, and we had two players on him. That if that's what it takes, that's what we need to do. It was effective.
yeah, they closed him down.
Yeah,
So in that sense, we played away. I think a lot of the ways that we would have wanted to, and honestly, like certainly if you look at City's lineup, I mean, obviously the first one you notice is the keeper Stefan Ortega is their backup. He's not Ederson.
okay, right,
Um, but if you look at the lineup they rolled out there, the only player they were really missing that you would really, if you're a City, you would really want to see was Kevin De Bruyne.
right.
Um, so we played a full strength or close to full strength City team and played them really well, and that's
Yeah,
regardless of the results. Obviously, it would have been frustrating to lose to them again. I think it's very psychologically important that we got the goal to tie us, and especially winning in the shootout. Like to get the psychological advantage of actually getting that result under our belts, I think is really helpful. But even if we had lost, I think you could have walked away from the game and saying, no, we can play with these guys. They're not, the gap is not that big. The
right.
gap, again, they're the heavy favorites to win the league. They probably will. But we should not be afraid of them.
Yeah.
At least certainly not be afraid to go on the field and go toe to toe with them.
Well, it's like they say in Predator: if it bleeds, it can be killed.
Mm-hmm. And they got there was a little bit of bleeding there, a little bit of the
Yeah,
metaphorical bleeding. I didn't,
yeah, of course.
although actually there was
Well, the head injuries.
the head injury there in late in the second half. They brought up the bandages for Party, and I forgot who the City player was who had to
Right.
get his head wrapped up. But
Yeah,
yeah,
do you
so
know what the purpose of those bandages was? Because they did it on both of them. Was it a precautionary measure, or do you know?
well, so if they're bleeding, they can't be allowed to bleed. There's no
Well,
blood, so
yeah.
they have
So
to
you
clean it up.
you
And
think there was
so
blood? I didn't see blood.
I didn't see it, but I suspect that's what it.
Okay.
Because what it is tape is to hold on a bandage, and so you're taping.
Yeah.
So it's not so much like they're holding their head in place; it's they put a
Well, yeah. I
lot of it
didn't
was
know
they
if it
put a
was
bandage on.
precautionary padding in case
Well,
of another head-to-head injury
that's
or
not
something.
what that
Okay.
wouldn't provide. I mean, the tape
Okay.
they're doing it. I mean, it's tape. You can get you can
Yeah.
get that, and
That's gauze or something. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
not. There's nothing fancy about
Right.
it. So yeah. There was presumably there was blood, which is why also both of them had to come off the field. Apparently, I didn't hear this at all, but I heard this today. Apparently, there's a new rule that when players have to come off the field for an injury, they have to stay off for 30 seconds, at
Hmm.
least 30 seconds. Because what
Okay.
you and I kind of like that because what you would get,
Well,
especially
yeah.
later in games, is players ow, I hurt. And
Right.
then there's the long delay where the trainer comes out and they have to walk them off. And then a lot of times, as soon as the game restarts, they're waving to come back in, and the ref says, okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
But now 30 seconds is a long time to be down a
Well, yeah.
man.
No, I mean the whole idea behind making them come off to me is a smart way of discouraging abuse, and it seems like the 30-second minimum makes sense. It just gives that more teeth. It's kind of like it's in keeping with the spirit of the whole idea of having them come off the field in the first place, I think.
Yeah, I mean, part of it also is you want to get the game back on, and so when the player is on the field receiving treatment, look, if you can get them off the field and treat them out on the sideline, that would be
Right.
better. Then we can keep playing. That would be better
Right.
for everybody.
Since the
Um,
stopwatch is running now, when
yeah, we know
yeah,
that somebody's tracking that time,
yeah,
which you saw that. I mean, there was not only there were a lot of stoppage time added on in the end of the second half, but also that time was extended because a
right.
good
The head
chunk of it
injury
involved the
happened.
two,
Yeah,
Party and them
yeah.
being down with the injuries. So
And further, we scored our tying goal during the extension of the stoppage time, like beyond the minimum. So
yeah.
yeah, it definitely worked to our advantage this time
Yeah.
around.
Although I mean that part about extending stoppage time because of an injury, see that
Oh
plenty.
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
part that wasn't necessarily
But it was
unusual,
on
but
top
right.
of the 8 minutes already. Like that's the key
Right.
thing. We scored like 11 minutes or so into stoppage time. Like it was, yeah,
Yeah. So it's 90. It was at 90 plus 11 is the one I'm looking at.
right.
So
Yep,
101st a minute.
yep. So a couple questions about this match. First of all, what are the yellow card accumulation rules? Is there none beyond this match, or does it reset for like FA Cup competition later on? Or
It is done by competition.
okay,
So
so this is a one-off, and
yeah. This
okay,
since this game is a one off, it doesn't really matter.
yep,
The yellow card accumulation rules kick in only for the Premier League. And I believe there are yellow card accumulation rules for the cups, but I think
right,
like those are so rarely like even in play because of how few games they actually are. You'll see it in the Champions League sometimes, talking players accumulating yellow cards in the group and maybe having to miss a knockout stage game or something to that effect.
yep,
The difference there, though, is because in the case of England, all the cards are, or all the competitions in England are all under the FA in terms of their rules. A a yellow card suspension, I think, is only is served in the Premier League, but a red card suspension, if any player picked up a red, they'd actually be suspended for the next Premier League game.
If they get the red card in the Champions League, they'd be suspended from the Premier League. You're saying
Only the cups, so anything in England.
okay?
European
Oh,
competitions because it's
gotcha.
under UEFA is a separate bookkeeping. But I believe actually I'm not sure about that. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But I
Okay,
do think there's some weird overlap in some of those how those function.
Right. I get what you meant by in England now. You know, because their games are pretty much all in England, but you mean when they're playing an FA match as
When
opposed
they're
to a
playing
Premier League match. Okay.
a match that would be run under the auspices of the FA, which would
Hmm.
be the Premier League, the FA Cup, the League Cup, and the Community Shield.
Okay.
If you're in the Community Shield, of course.
Right. So the other small thing I wanted to ask about. So I always keep a note that we drive the show based on, and I always note the score for each match that we're going to talk about, just to have it for reference. For this one, so how do you? What is the proper notation for a match won in a penalty shootout? Because I think I've seen they'll give like 1-1 for this match, and then they'll say, and they'll add on the 4-1 penalty shootout score or something like that. Is that it? Like, if you want to abbreviate it to one score, is there like a marking next to either of the ones or something?
What you could do, yeah, I mean, what you could do is what you said there. Like, as we think about the way it's sort of typically laid out, sometimes it's, home team score hyphen visiting team score, visiting team name, right? And
Yep.
that, I realize it's going backwards on my screen, but that's what it looks like to me. What you might see is next to each number, you might see in parentheses the penalty number. So for this game, it would be Arsenal 1 parentheses 4 dash City 1 parentheses 1 Manchester City. You could see that. You could also see, like you mentioned, the score: Arsenal 1-1 Manchester City, and then afterwards Arsenal wins 4-1 on penalties.
Right.
Both of those would be considered accurate.
Gotcha.
You can so in terms of officially record keeping wise, the game was a draw. We played 90 minutes.
Right.
We've had the same number of goals. It's a draw. For a competition like this, they're not going to bother with extra time, which is good because our lineup was kind of a mess. But I mean, we were playing at that point. We had like 2 defenders on the field by the end of the game that were throwing guys on to get offensive players to get a goal. Of course, you wouldn't bother with that. Arteta wouldn't have played that way, except that he knew it was the shootout. We needed the goal, and he didn't have to worry about what would happen after that. We got the goal, we got to the shootout. If you have extra time afterwards, you treat it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only time you would have seen extra time was the game against Sporting, where Arsenal got knocked out of the Europa League last year.
Right. Yep. And does the World Cup not do? Yeah, I guess they don't do, or they do extra time.
They do extra time, yeah.
Okay.
So you go, in the knockout stages.
Right. So I may have seen some there too.
Yeah, that's true. You would have seen that also. So and you'll see that goals scored in extra time count. So if it had gone to extra time and Arsenal had scored, the final score would be Arsenal 2-1.
Right.
Win.
Right.
You can win or lose in extra time, but once you're in penalties, the game officially is a draw,
mm-hmm.
and the penalties are just there to determine who advances in whatever in the competition that you're in.
So when you say it matters for the record keeping, what effect does that have? Like, I know, so if we're talking about Premier League standings, a win or a draw is a difference in the number of points that you would get, but there is no extra time. It just is a draw in that case. So if we're talking about the FA Cup or the Champions League, what does it matter whether you had I guess, is it like home field advantage or something like that, where if you might have a better record than someone else, it would matter or something? Why would it matter?
It's just quite literally in terms of like what your record looks like. I mean, teams keep track of their record in terms of like how they do in competitions, how they do against certain teams. Technically, Arsenal drew Manchester City on Sunday.
Right. Okay.
Technically, that's what happened. Again, no one really will remember that. It doesn't really matter because, the end result, same as if this had been a final of, say, the FA Cup, we draw the game, but win on penalties, win the FA Cup. Absolutely nobody cares that it's a draw. What matters is we won the cup. We won the shield. That's the only thing that really matters. But if you want to be super technical about it,
yep.
And I know you enjoy being super technical. But if you really want to be technically, that was a draw, and then we won on penalties because you had to have penalties to determine some kind of winner. That's sort of what it is. The point of penalties is the game can't decide, but we need a winner for whatever reason, a trophy advancing. Yep. that's why you have penalties.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I was looking at it through the lens of, for this one match, what does it matter? But I guess it matters more in the cumulative statistics. How have we done against Manchester City over however many years? How have we done in the Champions League or something? What does our record look like when you're looking at a total number of wins, draws,
Yeah,
and losses? Yeah.
right. And it's one of those it's one of those things that's so rarely actually like remarked upon. It's like, your record in knockout competitions. Did you win or lose? Yeah, well, we drew. No, did you win or lose? You either won and advanced, or you lost and you were eliminated. So again, in sort of an official record book kind of way, it matters. But what matters is, in this case, we got the shiny thing. So
Right. So any final thoughts on this match before we go to other topics?
I do. I want to throw this out there because I forgot to mention it to you before, but we sort of had a chance to touch on it with the David Raya coming in. Of course, Aaron Ramsdale, who was we said didn't do a lot of work, made a couple of good saves there in the second half. And also, of course, it made a save in the shootout, which really good for him. It's interesting because earlier last week, I'd sent you this. I put the link there for you, so you can take a look at this later. He did a piece for a website called the Players Tribune, which is a website where basically athletes write articles about themselves, sort of their chance to tell their stories, and it's him telling a story about. I mean, there's a whole bunch of like crazy things he talks about in there, like the reactions that people had when he was signed by Arsenal, and some of the negative reactions he got dealing with fans. He tells us, it's the idea he really talks about is, sort of how he's sort of struggled for everything and the difficulties he's gone through to get to the position he's in. Which the idea of David Raya coming in. I mean, David Raya is not going to come in just to be the backup. He's going to come in and gun for Ramsdale's job. But if you're a guy like Ramsdale, to have that and then to follow it up with a performance like that, and he talks about a few other things. I mean, this, the really awful story is his wife had a miscarriage 3 days before the North London derby at Tottenham last year. And remember that was, I mean, he played really well in that game. And also, that was the game where a Spurs fan jumped out of the stands and kicked him after the game too. Which
that one.
Obviously, as that's happening, you're kind of like, "What's happening? That's awful." And then he sort of, there's so much of these guys we don't know about because of their personal lives, and so much of the way they present themselves through social media is, of course, very curated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for something like this to really sort of tell his story, he talks a lot about his brother who's gay and sort of how he wants him to be able to, be himself, watching football and all of that. So he goes into a lot of different things, talks about a lot of sort of stuff that is clearly important to him and is clearly on his mind. And it kind of gives a lot of extra depth to him. So really an interesting, really sort of an interesting read. I've seen bits and pieces of it, haven't quite gotten all the way through. But there's, it does give a little bit of depth to some of what we're also seeing, some of what you also see on the field.
Sure. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm glad you brought him up, actually, because before we leave the match, I did want to say, yes, I noticed his particularly good performance. And before you shared about it looking like David Raya may be a nearly done deal, but that it's actually going to happen, I'd been wondering, just knowing how Ramsdale is largely from the documentary about 2 seasons ago now, just kind of seeing just the way he is, and even just on the field, like when you're seeing them play, you can kind of tell how he takes things. It seems like he's a very competitive person, right? And I guess a lot of people at this level are, but like super competitive to the point where I almost wondered, is Arteta trying to get a better performance out of him by kind of threatening, like, we can replace you. I was wondering if that was an aspect to the talks, at least, of bringing on David Raya. But
my instinct is no, because a club like Arsenal, if they're going after a player, it's because they're interested in him.
Right.
And there's a story that floated around, a few older Arsenal fans will talk about in the think it must have been in the 90s. They had done really well and were bringing in a new keeper, and there was a whole conversation. What was wrong with the new guy? What was wrong with the old guy? What does it say about your confidence in him? Why are they doing this? And they asked the manager, and he said, well, "He's a better keeper." Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we know Arteta likes competition for spots, but he wants the best possible team out there. And Ramsdale has some holes in his game. There are some things he doesn't do particularly well. He's not the best shot stopper. We mitigate that a lot by not giving up a lot of shots because we control possession against so many teams. But he's not the greatest shot stopper. Raya is a much better one. Ramsdale is good with the ball at his feet, but sometimes on long balls, they aren't the longest or aren't the most accurate. Raya can be better at that. So, Arteta's not a guy who's going to do things just for the psychological. I mean, he'll do plenty of things for the psychological. Scouting and going for players like that, he wants him. And we know this also because we've put in for David Raya in the past. He's a guy we have shown interest in before. So I'm not super surprised that we would be interested in him, just obviously because of what we know about Ramsdale and obviously a little bit how we feel about Ramsdale. It feels a little bit weird or different. And, because like you can bring in Declan Rice and he's a replacement for Thomas Partey. Once you saw Rice and Partey played together and played very well, I thought overall. I don't know. I'm curious. What did you think of the new guys, Timber, Kai Havertz, and Declan Rice? I know we want to move off the Shield, but I don't want to move off the Shield for just a moment.
Sure.
What did you think of did anything stand out about the new guys?
Nothing really stood out yet. And, I've seen him play. I think this may have been the first time I've seen Timber with some serious time on the field. But the rest of them, I'd seen them play enough. Like, this isn't like my first exposure to them. And, they seem fine. Like, it's tough a lot of the time. I'm not paying close enough attention probably to midfielders to have a strong opinion of them. I guess Havertz is on the front line. And, he didn't really do too much before he got subbed out. And clearly, when they brought him off and brought Trossard on, that resulted in, the goal that we ended up scoring. So, yeah, I mean, no really strong opinions yet, I would say. What about you?
I thought Timber was excellent. He basically was Zinchenko. And, for someone at his age and sort of walk right in to do, I mean, Zinchenko plays a unique role in a lot of ways. And for him to walk in and basically do that and against a club like Manchester City is pretty impressive. His tracking back defensively was pretty solid as well. I thought he was very good. The group I was with we're not big fans of Kai Havertz. And there's an awkwardness to him. He was we weren't expecting him. He arguably underperformed at Chelsea. He's coming from Chelsea. So there's a lot of baggage he carries on that. But I thought he did overall pretty well. I mean, we do suffer without Jesus. That's kind of clear. I thought Havertz was okay. He had a couple of shots that he definitely scuffed and was like, you need to do better with that. But overall, I thought his movement was good. I thought he was in good positions. And, when Trossard came on, I wasn't at all surprised that, of the four players on the forward line who got subbed off, it was Martinelli who didn't have a bad game, but I thought was a little anonymous. I wasn't surprised when he went off. He'll be fine. Arteta loves him. He's a great player. It happens. Rice, like a lot of midfielders, sometimes you want them to be anonymous, especially defensively, but he had a few good plays tracking back. You could see he still hasn't quite connected with his teammates, but, as we said, there's a pretty steep learning curve with the kind of position he plays and the things that Arsenal and Arteta want him to do. So it'll take a little bit of time, and being able to play with Partey, I think, will help the both of them. Certainly in the short term as it gets bedded in, and then also the longer term when I think ideally you might get to a point later in the season where you can actually rotate them in between games, perhaps. But we'll see. It'll be curious how they end up playing that going forward.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think it's also tough. I think when I haven't fully internalized like easy identification of who the new players are yet. I think I'm maybe not noticing them like at all for a lot of it. Like I didn't ID Timber for a while. Was he the one whose boot came off? I think at one point.
Yes,
and like, I didn't know who that was at first, and I was like, I kept on missing when they were showing, and I thought I saw it on his shoe at one point that looked like it may have had a name, and I couldn't make it out. So yeah, I'm blind to them a little bit, but
Yeah.
more to follow. So actually, so was there anything else? That
I didn't. That was all I could think of. Other than getting again the shield, which is.
oh yeah,
I mean, is it? It's the least important thing. It's arguably more important than the MLS All Star Challenge as far as trophies won this summer. Um, but as you said, it's nice to get something over City, and
sure,
I sort of psychologically, like, if you're City, they clearly don't care. I mean, they lost this game last year and then wound up winning everything anyway.
right.
So for them, and they are a slower starting team under Guardiola. So for them, there's going to be some time to bet in. They lost some key players in the summer. It'll take a little bit of time for them to really get fully up to speed. So this isn't a result that's going to bother them one way or the other. For Arsenal, for us, the psychological advantage of getting the result against a club that's been a real, obviously is the sort of the marker, the standard for the league. To get a result against them is a real positive for us. And again, the trophy is nice, but I think the performance is better, and I feel pretty good about where we are going into the new season, into the Premier League campaign.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm excited. I can't wait for it to start. And I guess it's a relatively easy way to get into it, starting with Nottingham. I mean, do you know how they're shaping up compared to last season?
As I understand it, well, I guess they're getting a slightly better keeper in
Right.
in Matt Turner. No, I suspect Forest will be close to where they were last year. Probably in the not. I mean, maybe a little better in that they won't be putting it till the end of April to survive relegation. But I suspect they're if you're looking at teams that are likely to be relegated, they're probably on that list.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's what I've been assuming, but just wanted to confirm. So
Yes, as far as an opening game, home to Forest is a pretty nice opener.
yeah,
A couple of years ago, when Unai Emery was a manager, his first two games were City at home and at Chelsea. It did not go very well.
yeah,
Or even if you go to the document, the year before you started with the All or Nothing season, they opened Brentford City or Brentford Chelsea City. Like,
mm,
I mean, the Brentford one was tough for different reasons, but then going City, at Chelsea and then home to, or no, it was at Chelsea home at City. It was, oh boy, that was a lot. But
yeah. Yeah, sounds like it would have been. so, so I wanted to cover two things actually. One that I just remembered we can cover, and then the other one that we talked about. So, do you want to do the one we talked about or the surprise?
let's start with the one I'm talking about. Yeah, because I think I know the one you want to talk. We've talked about. So let's hit that, and then we can throw in a surprise there at the
Okay.
end.
So, Super League, the War for Football. So, you
Mhm.
subscribed to Apple TV Plus for a bit over the summer. You caught up on Ted Lasso and other things such as Super League, the War for Football. So, listeners from last season will recall this was a documentary that is an Apple TV Plus exclusive. I watched it. We did an episode talking about it. Keith hadn't seen it yet at that time, but he lived it. He didn't need to watch a documentary about it. So, we still had a nice discussion talking about that whole debacle. But you have now seen it, so tell me what are your new thoughts on it?
Um, I thought it's a documentary. I definitely think it was definitely friendly to Sheffield and UEFA
Right.
overall. And sort of what we talked about, there seemed to be a presumption about, and we had this conversation about who does the game belong to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I do think there was definitely a spoken, it wasn't unspoken, it was definitely spoken, a presumption out the game being belonging to the fans and what it was accomplishing, what it was trying to accomplish, and what we mean by that. I do think they gave time to Agnelli and Perez as far as explaining sort of what they were going for and some of the criticisms they have of UEFA, which aren't entirely unfair. I mean, part of the problem you run into in all of this is somebody has to run these competitions, and you almost can't trust the clubs to do it themselves. because they all have competing interests as far as what's involved now, especially when you start talking about something the size of UEFA, 50 some countries, hundreds of clubs in each country, and you're talking about you're comparing a second division Croatian team to Real Madrid. They're not even in the same. Yes, technically they're in the same universe, but they're not really in the same conference. It's completely different, almost completely different entities, except they both play the same sport. Um, somebody has to run it. UEFA has definitely had more than its share of scandals. I do come away thinking that Sheffield he's known as a reformer, but then again, I remember them talking about Michel Platini being a reformer, and that turned out not to be true at all.
Right.
As you may recall from some of the other stuff about FIFA.
Yeah.
It definitely was friendly to him. I guess one of the curious things, and it bothered me certainly at the time, is the way a lot of English fans were pointing the finger a lot at the American owners, of Stan Kroenke, also the Glazers who own Manchester United, and John Henry, who's the head of the group that owns Liverpool. And certainly the Americans were involved. They basically worked as a unit, right? They agreed together to join the Super League and then pulled out roughly the same time. But the driving force behind the Super League wasn't them. Wasn't the Americans. I mean, yes, there was an American bank. I think it was Chase that was, bankrolling or, was providing a lot of the financing for it.
Mm-hmm.
But you saw that the masterminds behind this are Florentino Perez and Andrea Agnelli, who a Spaniard and an Italian.
Right.
So that's me sort of pushing back against some of the traditional provincialism you get, and it's a residue of a reflex anti-Americanism you'll sometimes see in Europeans. I get it, but also I find in this context I find it particularly annoying, especially given the facts of the case involving, again, an Italian and a Spaniard. This is their idea. Yeah, I guess one of the bigger criticisms I had was about sort of the lack of detail about the competition. They had bits and pieces in it that suggested they had a little bit more detail to it than I recalled. So I'll certainly plead a certain amount of incorrectness on that. I did re-listen to that episode after watching it and went back and was like, oh, I said a bunch of things wrong there, which will happen.
Of course.
I don't feel. I mean, I don't feel good about it, but also like
you're fired.
It happens. Yeah, well, you know what? That's fine. I have other things that. But yeah, it's it was an interesting documentary. Yeah, I do think it's definitely more favorable to Sheffer, and clearly he collaborated more. Was much more collaborative with them in making it. I thought that some of the dramatizations of some of the conversations were weird because it was clearly them doing it. Like it wasn't like a random actor who you just said the back of his head looks a lot like the back of Sheffrin's head. But no, it looked like it was him, and I found that very weird.
So it's been a while now since I watched it, but I don't remember dramatizations. I think perhaps what I thought was the case, and perhaps I'm wrong, but for some reason I thought that maybe they were documenting this already for some other reason. They were there witnessing the actual phone calls, but maybe that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I suppose that's possible, but it does seem very bizarre that would happen that way. But yeah, I do think they gave it good, even in spite of the fact I think it leaned towards the UEFA side of it. And again, I say this is someone who ultimately I'm glad the Super League did not happen. I think that's I kind of like the system the way it is, understanding some of the complaints people have about it. I did think they did a decent job of allowing Perez and Agnelli to air some of what they were thinking and why they were trying to do it. And you can criticize them by saying it's self-serving, but frankly, all of them are being a little bit self-serving. And that's just, when you consider the amount of money at stake and the kind of power in place, I get it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that update. The other topic I had in mind, perhaps we'll save that as a superfan only bonus topic after the outro.
Okay.
All right. So tell us what's up for next week. We've already stated it, but when and how?
We've said it. Happy New Year. The Premier League season begins on Saturday. Arsenal home to Nottingham Forest. Away to Forest has been a bit of a bugaboo for us recently in various competitions, but home to Forest, I mean, let's get off to a good start again. We have, the month of August is definitely very winnable. We have Forest at home to Crystal Palace, and then home against Fulham, and that's August for us before we get Manchester United in the first weekend of September. So there's a really good opportunity to get off to a good start, and it starts at home against a team that probably is going to be close to the relegation zone.
Yeah. Good. Looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and some other places, and we appreciate you subscribing to our show and sharing it with friends. If you want to listen ad-free, you can become a Gooner U superfan for ad-free episodes as well as raw, unedited recordings that are available the night we record, and for occasional bonus content, so stick around. We'll give you a little bit of that when I'm done with our outro. It's only $1 a month, and there's a link in the show notes to join. It helps keep the show going. We really appreciate everyone who does that. So thanks again to our sponsor, Liquid IV. You can find them with our special link in the description. Don't forget to use code Gooner. There is no U in Gooner at checkout. You can follow our show on Twitter at GoonerU for updates and ask questions. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
Community Shield champions.